When I shook hands with the alien princess, she began to quiver, and I didn't know why the sun was setting over the alien world as Captain Elias Westbrook stood in front of the Grand Palace. His shuttle had just landed, and the surroundings were as unfamiliar as they were breathtaking. The towering structures were made of smooth, reflective material, shimmering in the dying light. The air smelled faintly of metal and something sweet, though he couldn't quite place it. Elias had been to many planets, met countless species, and negotiated peace deals with some of the most enigmatic beings in the galaxy. But today was different. Today, he was about to meet the Princess of Vantora, a race of people so advanced, so secretive, that no human had ever stepped foot on their home planet without a specific invitation. His mission here was simple: establish a diplomatic relationship that would benefit both species. But with Vantora, nothing was ever simple. He followed the regal guards, their white uniforms shimmering like the buildings, until they arrived at a grand hall. The space was vast, with walls that seemed to stretch into infinity. At the far end stood the throne, and on it the princess. She was taller than him, her pale skin glowing under the light. Her hair was like liquid silver cascading down her back in waves. Her eyes were large and almond-shaped, shimmering with a light of their own, darker than any shade of blue he had ever seen. She was dressed in flowing robes, a combination of elegant simplicity and intimidating authority. As Elias approached the throne, the guards parted, and he was left alone in front of the princess. His palms were slightly sweaty, his heart beating a little faster than usual, but he had been in many high-stakes meetings. This, though, felt different. Something in the air, something about her, was sending an unexplainable ripple through him. He took a deep breath, standing tall and confident despite the unease growing inside him. The princess rose from her seat, her presence commanding the attention of the room. Elias bowed his head slightly in respect. "I am Captain Elias Westbrook," he introduced himself, his voice steady. "I know who you are, human," the princess responded, her voice a melodic blend of kindness and authority. It was neither warm nor cold, but it carried a weight. "You are the first of your kind to visit our world. I must admit I expected your species to be less impressive." Elias wasn't sure if the comment was a compliment or an insult. He decided to let it slide, focusing on the task at hand. "We come in peace," he said. "We wish to establish a mutually beneficial relationship between our peoples." The princess studied him for a long moment, her eyes glimmering with curiosity. He noticed her gaze was unyielding, yet strangely intense. He could feel the weight of it on his shoulders. "I would be lying if I said I wasn't skeptical," she finally spoke. "But I will give you the opportunity to prove your intentions, Captain Westbrook. There will be no diplomacy if there is no trust." Elias nodded, sensing the challenge in her words. It was something he had heard countless times before, but there was something about her tone, the way she spoke, that made him think this wasn't just about politics. "I understand, Your Highness. We are prepared for the challenges ahead." The princess gestured toward the space before her, and the guards stepped aside, leaving her standing alone. Without breaking eye contact, she extended her hand toward Elias. "Then let us begin," she said simply. Elias hesitated for a brief moment, his instincts telling him to remain cautious. In his experience, a handshake often signified the beginning of something important, sometimes with consequences. But he had come this far. And it was clear that, with the princess standing before him, there was no turning back now. He stepped forward, reaching out to shake her hand. As his fingers brushed against her smooth, cool skin, something happened. A strange sensation washed over him, something he couldn't explain. A tingling sensation spread from his fingertips, slowly traveling up his arm. It wasn't painful, but it felt intense, like an electric charge running through his body. His breath caught in his throat for a second, his heart rate accelerating slightly. The princess's eyes widened for the briefest of moments, and Elias could have sworn he saw a flicker of surprise cross her face. But in an instant it was gone, replaced by a calm, composed expression. Her hand was still in his, and the strange sensation lingered. She didn't seem to be affected by it. Her quiver, the small tremor he had seen when they first touched, had barely lasted a moment. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just occurred. Her voice broke through his thoughts. "I see," she said quietly, almost to herself. Elias pulled his hand back quickly, his pulse racing. He cleared his throat, unsure of what just happened or what to say next. "I am sorry. I don't know what happened there." The The princess's gaze softened for a split second, though the intensity remained in her eyes. "It is nothing," she replied, but there was something in her tone that suggested it was far from nothing. Perhaps just a moment of curiosity. Elias wasn't convinced. The way she had reacted, so subtle yet so noticeable, bothered him. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he knew that it would be something he would not forget. They stood in silence for a few more moments, each of them digesting the moment in their own way. Elias could feel his mind racing. What had just happened? Why had she quivered like that? Was it something to do with him, or was it something about her species? Or maybe he wasn't sure. "I am pleased to meet you, Captain Westbrook," the princess said finally, breaking the silence. "But our meeting has just begun. There are many things to discuss." Elias nodded, still uneasy but determined. "Of course, I look forward to our discussions, Your Highness." The princess turned her gaze away, and Elias couldn't help but wonder if she was hiding something. But for now, he had no choice but to follow her lead and learn what he could. What had happened during their handshake wasn't just a fluke. He could feel it in his bones. This was just the beginning of something far more complicated than a simple diplomatic mission. The next few days on Vantora were a blur of meetings, formal gatherings, and quiet moments of reflection. Elias couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted the moment he had touched the princess's hand. His thoughts kept drifting back to the brief quiver she had shown, as though something deep within her had reacted to him. But every time he tried to bring it up, either with the princess or with his fellow diplomats, the subject was quickly steered elsewhere. It was clear that the princess wasn't going to acknowledge what had happened, at least not in any way that made sense to him. And yet he couldn't escape the pull of that strange moment. His mind kept replaying the image of her soft, almost imperceptible tremor. He wondered if anyone else had noticed. Was it something she did on purpose, or was there more to it? Elias had no answers, and every time he tried to pry, the walls went up higher. The palace, though beautiful, felt cold. Its vast halls and corridors were filled with light, but there was no warmth. Everything was immaculate, like it had been built to look perfect but not to feel alive. The sounds in the palace were so precise, so measured, that it made Elias uncomfortable. It felt like being in a place where every step was calculated, every movement anticipated. For the first time in his life, Elias began to feel like an outsider, not just as a human, but as someone who didn't belong in a place this vast, this unknown. And the princess? She was even more of an enigma now. She was always polite, always regal, but there was something hidden behind her eyes, something she wasn't saying. Each day, the schedule grew more intense. There were long discussions about trade, technology, and mutual cooperation. Elias learned that the Vantora people had advanced far beyond humanity in many ways. Faster-than-light travel, bioengineering, and even the ability to communicate over vast distances using only their minds. They were a people full of mystery, their history rich with secrets. The princess was the key to unlocking many of those secrets, and Elias had the sense that he was standing on the edge of something monumental. But the princess, as beautiful and intelligent as she was, remained an elusive figure. She attended the meetings with poise and grace, offering solutions to complex problems with ease. Yet, every time Elias looked at her, he couldn't help but feel the question hanging in the air. What was the real reason she had quivered during their handshake? Why did he feel as though there was something more to it than just a simple greeting? One evening, after the last of the formal gatherings had ended, Elias found himself alone in his quarters. The room was quiet, save for the soft hum of the ventilation system. He walked over to the window and stared out at the alien city below. The lights from the towers flickered against the night sky, and for a brief moment, he felt like he was looking at an entirely different world, one that was nothing like Earth. His thoughts turned back to the princess. He remembered the way she had looked at him when they shook hands and how quickly she had regained her composure. She had given him nothing, yet her reaction had told him everything. But what did it mean? Was it a sign of something personal, or was it connected to the ancient bond between her people and whatever power they held? The sound of a soft knock at the door broke his reverie. He turned, surprised. He wasn't expecting anyone, least of all the princess. But when he opened the door, it wasn't her. Instead, a servant stood before him holding a small, ornate box. "The princess has requested your presence," the servant said quietly, bowing slightly. "She wishes to speak with you." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Now?" "Yes, Captain." "She says it is urgent." Elias nodded, a bit confused but not willing to question the request. "All right, lead the way." The servant turned and began walking down the corridor, with Elias following closely behind. The palace was even quieter at night, the only sounds the soft echo of their footsteps on the polished floors. They passed through several hallways before finally reaching a set of double doors. The servant opened them with a gentle push, and Elias stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with only a few candles casting soft shadows on the walls. The princess stood by a large window, her silhouette outlined by the pale light of a distant moon. When she turned to face him, her expression was unreadable. "Captain Westbrook," she greeted him, her voice calm but firm. "Please sit." Elias did as she asked, taking a seat in one of the chairs set in front of her. He could feel his heart racing, not from fear but from anticipation. He wasn't sure what was happening, but something told him this moment was different from the others. This was not about diplomacy. This was something personal. The princess walked slowly toward him, her movements graceful like a predator. She stopped just short of him, her eyes searching his face as if weighing something. "You're wondering about the handshake, aren't you?" she said, her voice softer now. There was a hint of something else in her tone, something like regret. Elias didn't respond immediately. He was stunned that she had brought it up first. I don't know what you mean," he said, his words coming out quieter than he intended. He had to admit he had been wondering, but how did she know? The princess's lips curled into the smallest of smiles. "You felt it too, didn't you?" she asked. "The moment we touched, the connection." Elias nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't deny it. He had felt something strong, almost electric, but how could he explain it? How could he tell her that the connection wasn't just a brief moment, but a lingering sensation that still had him in its grip? She sat down opposite him, folding her hands in her lap. "I knew this would happen," she said, almost to herself. "I've been feeling it for days, but I didn't want to believe it. But now I can't ignore it any longer." "Feeling what?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The princess looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "It's a bond," she said. "A bond that should not exist between us, and yet here we are." Elias didn't understand. "A bond," he repeated, confusion filling his voice. "Between you and me?" "Yes," she replied softly. "But it's not something I can control, and it's not something I can ignore anymore. We're connected, Captain, in ways that neither of us can explain, and it terrifies me." Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. His mind raced, trying to process everything she had just said. "What do you mean? How is this possible?" She shook her head. "I don't know. But it's real and it's dangerous." Elias leaned forward slightly, his voice urgent. "What is this bond? What does it mean for us?" The princess closed her eyes for a moment, collecting her thoughts. "It's ancient, something my people have been warned about. It's a connection that forms when two beings, two very different beings, share something deep, and it's always been considered dangerous." Elias' heart was pounding now. This was far beyond anything he had prepared for. "Are you saying that this bond? It's something we can't control?" The princess looked at him, her gaze sharp yet vulnerable. "No, Captain, I'm saying that this bond could change everything, for both of us." Elias sat back in his chair, his mind whirling with the possibilities. The connection between him and the princess was real, and it was only just beginning. Elias sat in the dimly lit room, the words the princess had just spoken echoing in his mind. A bond, a connection between them that neither of them could explain. He had thought of many things during his time on Vantora: diplomacy, power, strategy, but never once had he considered that his mission would lead him to something like this. Something beyond comprehension, something personal, something dangerous. The princess, too, seemed lost in thought. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, her gaze focused on a point somewhere beyond Elias, though it was clear her mind was elsewhere. Her usual calm demeanor had slipped, and for the first time, Elias saw a hint of vulnerability in her eyes. He didn't know what to say. His thoughts were still tangled, the confusion, the excitement, and the fear all fighting for dominance in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was spiraling out of control, and yet in some strange way he felt drawn to it, drawn to her. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The princess turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze with a steady, almost unreadable look. "Now," she said, her voice calm but tinged with something else, "we figure out what this bond means together." Elias didn't know what to make of her words, together. Was she suggesting they share this bond willingly, or was there something more to it? He didn't understand why it had happened, or how it was even possible, but one thing was clear. There was no going back now. Whatever this was, it had already begun to change both of them. "I don't know what this bond is, but it feels real," Elias said, his voice low, his thoughts racing. "It's not just in my head, you felt it too, that moment when we touched. I can't explain it, but I can't ignore it either." The princess nodded, her eyes softening for a moment. "I know," she replied. "It's not something we can explain, but it's real, and it has consequences, Captain, consequences that we're only beginning to understand." Elias leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. "What kind of consequences?" The princess hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "My people have long believed in the power of connection," she said slowly. "The power to bond with another being on a level deeper than words, deeper than even physical touch. It's a rare occurrence, something that is both feared and revered among my kind. It is said that those who share such a bond can unlock powers that are beyond comprehension, but they must also bear the burden of that power." Elias felt a chill run through him. "Powers? What kind of powers?" The princess's gaze grew distant, as though lost in thought. "I can't say for certain, but there are old legends, whispers among the elders, that those who share this bond can influence the world around them in ways that no one else can. Minds can be read, emotions can be shared, and decisions can be made without a word spoken. It's a dangerous power, one that can drive people to madness if it's not controlled." Elias' heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission anymore. It was something far more complicated and far more dangerous. He had to know more. He had to understand what was happening between them. "Are you saying that this bond could give us powers? That we could?" He paused, trying to find the right words. "Control each other?" The princess's expression darkened. "No," she said firmly. "It's not about control, it's about connection. It's about sharing a part of yourself with another being. The power comes from understanding, not dominance, but it can be twisted. It can become something destructive if not handled carefully." Elias ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything she was saying. It was too much to take in at once. Too many unknowns. But one thing was clear: the princess was right. The bond between them wasn't just an oddity or a curiosity. It was something that could change everything, for both of them. "I didn't ask for this," Elias said quietly, his voice strained. "I didn't come here looking for a bond. I just wanted to make sure humanity had a chance to grow, to learn from other civilizations. But now this changes everything." The princess looked at him, her expression softening again, though there was still a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "I didn't ask for it either," she said. "But now that it's here, we must find a way to understand it, together. If we don't, it will destroy us both." Elias could feel the weight of her words, the seriousness of the situation. They were standing on the edge of something powerful, something dangerous, and he wasn't sure if they were ready for it. There was a long silence between them, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The tension was thick, and yet Elias felt something else, a strange pull toward the princess, not just because of the bond, but because of her. There was something about her strength, her grace, and her vulnerability that made him feel more connected to her than anyone he had ever met. It was as if the bond wasn't just something that existed between them. It was something that had always been there, waiting to be discovered. "I don't know if I can do this," Elias admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can carry this kind of weight." The princess regarded him carefully, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "You're not alone, Captain. You never were." Elias met her gaze, and for the first time since arriving on Vantora, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could figure this out together. Maybe they could control the bond, harness its power without succumbing to its dangers. But there was still so much they didn't know, so many risks. And what about the rest of the galaxy? Would the power between them be enough to change the course of history, or would it tear everything apart? As if sensing his thoughts, the princess spoke again, her voice steady and unwavering. "We need to be careful, Captain. This bond is not something we can ignore. It will influence everything, our decisions, our actions, even our emotions. We must learn to control it, or we risk losing ourselves." Elias nodded slowly, his mind still racing. "I understand. I'll do whatever it takes." The princess's gaze softened, and for the briefest of moments, Elias saw a flicker of something more than just royalty in her eyes. It was something human, something vulnerable. "I believe you," she said quietly. The words, simple as they were, meant more to Elias than he could explain. It wasn't just the princess's belief in him, it was the sense that maybe they could both figure this out. Together. And yet, despite the hope that flickered within him, Elias knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. The bond was just beginning to show its power, and with each passing moment, its weight grew heavier. What had started as a diplomatic mission had now become a journey into the unknown, a journey that would test both of them in ways they couldn't yet understand. But Elias was determined. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to turn back now. Whatever the bond meant, whatever dangers it brought, he would face it head-on. And he would do it with the princess by his side. For better or worse, the days that followed felt like a blur to Elias. Every moment seemed to stretch on forever, yet each day was filled with more questions than answers. He spent his time meeting with the princess, trying to understand the bond between them, but every time he thought he had a handle on it, it slipped away, leaving him more confused than before. The princess, too, seemed to be struggling. She was a beacon of calm, her expression always serene, but Elias could see the weight of the situation in her eyes. She had never expected this, and neither had he. The princess had known that this bond was rare, but the way it had formed between them was unlike anything her people had ever seen. They both felt it, this unspoken connection that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, like an invisible thread pulling them closer together. But it was also dangerous. The princess had made that clear. There were risks involved with this kind of connection. And as they delved deeper into understanding it, the more Elias realized how little they both knew about what was happening. It was as if they had opened a door to something they couldn't close again. He would lie awake at night, staring out at the alien city from his quarters, wondering what the future would hold. Would the bond between him and the princess become something that could change everything, or would it tear them apart? He didn't have the answers, and it was terrifying. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of violet and orange, Elias found himself walking through the palace gardens. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of strange flowers that he had never smelled before. The plants seemed to glow softly in the fading light, casting an ethereal glow on everything around him. He needed a moment to clear his head. The constant tension between him and the princess was taking its toll. Every interaction felt heavy, as if the bond was pressing down on them both, demanding more than they were willing to give. He needed space, a chance to think without the weight of her presence constantly at the back of his mind. As he walked along a path lined with shimmering trees, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, expecting to see one of the palace attendants, but instead it was the princess. She had followed him out here, though she hadn't said a word. Her presence was unmistakable, and for a moment, Elias couldn't help but feel the pull of the bond between them. "I thought I might find you here," she said quietly, her voice soft but filled with a kind of determination. Elias gave her a small nod, his heart quickening just slightly. "I needed some time to think," he admitted. "This whole situation is a lot to take in." The princess stood beside him, her gaze turning to the distant horizon. "I understand," she said. "I've been thinking a lot, too, about what this bond means, about what it could mean for both of us. I can feel it. Every day it grows stronger." Elias met her gaze, his eyes searching hers. "Do you think we can control it? Do you think we can learn to live with it?" For a moment, the princess didn't answer. She just stood there looking at him as though she was considering the question carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost regretful. "I don't know. I want to believe we can, but the truth is, Captain, I'm afraid of what this bond could become, afraid of what it could do to us." Elias could feel the sincerity in her words. He had always known she was strong, a leader in her own right, but in that moment he saw something else, something vulnerable. He had never seen this side of her before, and it made his heart ache in a way he didn't quite understand. "We've been thrust into something neither of us understands," Elias said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "But I don't want to give up on it, not yet. I think we can make it work if we try." The princess turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing just a little. "You really believe that?" Elias nodded, though his mind was racing. He wasn't sure how much longer they could keep this up. The connection between them was undeniable, but that didn't mean it was something they could control. It was dangerous, and every day it seemed to grow stronger, like a fire that could either warm them or burn everything to the ground. "I have to believe it," he said, his voice quiet but firm. If I don't, what's the point of being here? What's the point of all of this? The princess was silent for a long moment, her gaze still fixed on him. He could feel her hesitation, her fear, and yet there was something else there too, a spark of hope. "You're right," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we can make it work. Maybe together we can control this." Elias didn't know if it was possible, but for the first time in days he felt a sense of clarity. The bond was something they couldn't ignore. It was already part of them, and whatever happened, they would have to face it together. There was no other choice. But even as he felt the weight of the decision settle into his bones, Elias knew that the real challenge was yet to come. What would the rest of the galaxy think of this connection between him and the princess? Would they see it as a sign of unity, or would it become something that threatened the very balance of power? He didn't know, but he was willing to find out. As if reading his thoughts, the princess turned toward him, her expression serious once more. "There are others who will not understand this bond," she said. "Others who will see it as a threat. We are already facing political unrest in certain sectors of my court. If they learn what has happened between us, it could lead to chaos. We can't afford to let anyone know the truth, not yet." Elias nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He had come to Vantora with one goal, to establish peace and cooperation between their species. But now it seemed their mission had changed. They were no longer just diplomats. They were part of something much bigger than either of them. "I won't let anything happen to you," Elias said quietly. "To us, I'll do whatever it takes to protect what we have." The princess looked at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. She seemed to find none. Finally, she gave him a small, almost imperceptible smile. "I believe you," she said softly. And for the first time since arriving on Vantora, Elias felt as though he wasn't alone in this. Whatever lay ahead, he knew that the princess would be by his side, just as he would be by hers. The bond between them was undeniable, and though it terrified him, he also knew that it could lead them to a future neither of them could have imagined. They stood together in the quiet garden, the weight of their shared responsibility heavy in the air. And in that silence, Elias made a promise to himself. He would protect her. He would protect the bond. Whatever it took, the following days passed in a whirlwind of quiet decisions, uneasy glances, and heavy hearts. Elias could feel the weight of the bond every time he met the princess's gaze, and he knew she could feel it too. The connection between them had deepened, and with each passing moment it became harder to ignore. But they both understood one thing: they couldn't let it destroy them. Not yet. Not until they understood exactly what it was they were dealing with. The political unrest in the princess's court had escalated. Rumors of their growing connection had begun to spread, and there were whispers in the shadows, whispers that carried weight. Some factions within the Vantoran leadership saw the bond as a threat, a danger to their carefully controlled society. Others believed it could be used for their benefit, but no one knew what to make of it, not truly, and that uncertainty made them all the more dangerous. Elias could feel the tension building, like the quiet before a storm. Every meeting, every conversation, felt like a balancing act. He and the princess could no longer afford to be seen together in public without raising suspicion. They had to be careful. They had to hide what was happening between them, at least for now. But it wasn't just the court they had to worry about. The bond between them had begun to have effects neither of them had anticipated. They could sense each other's emotions now, feel the thoughts that swirled in the other's mind without speaking a word. Sometimes, Elias would feel the princess's frustration or her deep loneliness, even when she didn't show it. And at times, he could almost hear her voice in his head, as though she was speaking directly to him. It was both comforting and unnerving. The princess had warned him that the bond could become overwhelming, that it could push them to the edge of madness if they weren't careful. Elias didn't fully understand what she meant, but he could feel the pull growing stronger, like a current tugging at him, pulling him toward her whether he wanted it or not. And the more he tried to fight it, the harder it became to resist. One evening, as the sun began to set over the horizon, casting the city in a golden glow, Elias found himself alone in his quarters again. He had spent the day trying to keep up appearances, attending meetings, and playing the part of a diplomat. But he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The princess had been distant lately, her presence cold, and Elias couldn't help but feel the distance growing between them. It was as if the bond had pushed them to the edge, and neither of them knew how to hold on without falling off. The soft sound of a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts, and for a moment he didn't want to answer. He wasn't in the mood for another meeting, another political discussion. But then the door opened slowly and the princess stepped inside. Her eyes were dark, her expression unreadable, but Elias could see the weariness in her posture. She looked as tired as he felt. "Captain," she said quietly, her voice soft but carrying an underlying tension. "We need to talk." Elias nodded, stepping aside to let her in. He had known this conversation was coming, had known they couldn't avoid it forever. But he hadn't expected it to feel like this, so heavy, so final. The princess closed the door behind her and stood in the center of the room, her gaze never leaving Elias. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice quiet, almost hesitant, "about what this bond means. About what it could mean for our people, for the galaxy." Elias watched her, his heart aching with a mixture of frustration and fear. "I know," he said, his voice strained. "It's like we're being pulled in two different directions. One part of me wants to understand it to make it work, but the other part wants to break free. I can feel it, princess. The bond is becoming more than we can handle." The princess nodded, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. "I feel it too," she said. "It's like I can't think straight anymore. Like every thought, every decision is influenced by this connection. I don't know who I am anymore, Elias. I don't know where I end and you begin." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. He had felt it too, the overwhelming sense that they were losing themselves in this connection. It was both a blessing and a curse, a force that seemed to be beyond their control. "I don't want to lose you," Elias said, his voice tight. "But I don't know how to make this work. We can't go on like this. We can't keep hiding. It's tearing us apart." The princess took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of the situation had finally become too much for her. "I never asked for this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never wanted this bond, but it's here, and I don't know if I can live with it anymore. I don't know if I can live with the consequences." Elias took a step toward her, his heart pounding in his chest. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice low, filled with both fear and hope. The princess met his gaze, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. "I'm saying that we have to make a choice that will change everything. We can't keep living in this limbo, caught between the bond and our responsibilities. If we continue down this path, we risk everything, our people, our worlds, and ourselves." Elias swallowed hard, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy cloak. He had known this moment was coming, but he hadn't been prepared for the finality of it. What choice could they make? How could they possibly choose between the bond that seemed to define them and the worlds that depended on them? "What do you want me to do?" Elias asked, his voice breaking with emotion. "What are we supposed to do?" The princess closed her eyes, as if gathering the strength to say what needed to be said. "I don't know," she whispered, "but I do know one thing: we can't keep pretending. We can't keep hiding from the truth. This bond has changed us, Elias, and we have to decide whether we're willing to accept it or let it destroy us." Elias stood in silence, his mind racing. The choice was unimaginable. They couldn't go on like this, but could they really sever the bond? Could they go back to who they were before everything had changed? For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was deafening, each lost in their own thoughts, each struggling to find the right answer. Finally, the princess spoke again, her voice softer this time, almost pleading. "Please, Elias, we have to decide for both of us." Elias took a deep breath, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision before him. It was a decision he never thought he would have to make. But now, standing before the princess, he knew that there was no way out. They had to choose. "I don't know if I can let you go," Elias said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. The princess took a step closer, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. "You don't have to, but we have to find a way to control it or it will consume us." Elias nodded slowly, his heart aching with the impossible choice they faced. There was no easy answer, no simple solution, but one thing was certain: they couldn't keep running from the bond. They had to face it together. "I'll do whatever it takes," Elias said finally, his voice steady. "But we have to do it together, no matter what." And with those words, they both knew that their journey was far from over. The bond between them was just the beginning. The real test had yet to come.